Hello Year 10, this is a quick video to help you answer the week 3 literature homework, the 200 words analysis on Scrooge. Now the question is, how does Dickens use language to present Scrooge? Now we've got the extract here. I'm going to quickly read it and then I'm going to start telling you the notes that I started making about Scrooge. So Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully caught up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There he stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. Now, one of the first things I'd like to point out is that this is actually about someone's funeral. And when we think about someone's funeral, we should be actually really sad. We should be actually quite upset. But instead, what Scrooge seems to be focused more on is the financial aspects of Marley's funeral. He has complete involvement in sorting out the finances and the legalities of burying Marley. So one of the things that I started writing is the fact that Scrooge lacks an emotional connection, he lacks empathy, and he's more focused, and literally I'm going to write, he is more focused on the financial aspects of Marley's funeral, which is really unusual. As a friend, and probably Marley's only friend, there should be an element of emotion. Now, what this emphasizes about Scrooge is that he is actually ultimately really materialistic, really kind of self-centered, and that he's only after looking his own self-interests. Scrooge values business over any kind of other relationship. So I would say that those are the main ideas actually in the extract, that's how Scrooge actually is and what is being emphasized. Now, some of the techniques that I might want to focus to help make sure that I am writing about this is I might want to use the Dickens or analyze Dickens' use of anaphora. So I've got his soul, his soul, his soul, his soul, and then we've got soul there. So this is, there as well, soul. All of this is the use of anaphora. And is to emphasize actually the uniqueness and focus of Scrooge's interest in Marley's finances. Now, I would say that there's an aspect of irony here as well. This is what you guys, remember, this is your extract, your piece. You can disagree with everything I'm writing, okay? There's an aspect of irony, or even like one of the ways that you can describe this, there's a bit of, or Dickens uses what is called a sardonic tone. Sardonic. Now, the tone of this extract is really matter of fact, was really matter of fact to emphasize and criticize Scrooge's reaction to the funeral of his only friend. Okay, so there is almost that it's so matter of fact, it's so unemotional that makes Scrooge actually sound even worse. Now the irony I think lies in that maybe Dickens is using a bit of a pun with the word soul, because soul meaning only, so that Scrooge was the only person there to do all these things for Marley's funeral, but also it's a bit of a pun on the word soul. And I say that it's ironic because Scrooge, I think, ultimately, or the way that he deals with Marley's funeral, lacks a soul. He has no soul, lacks emotion. There is nothing there. Okay, so that might be something that you want to write about in your answers. The other bit that I thought was really, really interesting was the when you think about it, a bit of the semantic field of legalities or or jobs in general. So you've got kind of executor, administrator, assign, residuary legatee, and then you have got friend and sole mourner. But in particular, actually, they come last in that list. They're not at the beginning. They are they are towards the end, almost like Scrooge prioritizes these things about his relationship with Marley. So we got here a semantic field of official jobs. And again, what that highlights is that detachment that there is. The other bit that I really like in this description is when it says, and even Scrooge was not dreadfully caught up. So again, that is emphasizing that he has no emotions, considering that this is a funeral. And that actually creates a contrast. It creates a contrast for the reader in terms of, oh, that's an awful pen. It creates a contrast in terms of actually what the reader expects to be happening in a funeral and the reality of Scrooge's experience of this funeral. So the contrast is a funeral should be sad, but Scrooge isn't. Okay, so that's another idea that you can focus on. And last but not least, there is also this bit where it says but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral. Now, I would link that probably, again, up to either the semantic field of official jobs, as an extra bit of a quote, because that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral. Now, I feel like those words contrast each other. Business, funeral, lack of emotion, focus on materialistic things. Man of business, it presents him as materialistic, and I've already kind of written it here, rather than somebody that cares about his friend. And then last but not least, you've got this idea of there stood years afterwards above the warehouse door Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business referred to Scrooge as Scrooge and sometimes call him Marley. Now the sign, the fact that he never changes the sign, Scrooge never painted out or Marley's name. Again, I think it emphasizes that aspect that ultimately a business is a business. It's not about individuals and identity. To him, ultimately, not about individuals, identity, the person. Scrooge never paints Marley's name out because he doesn't really care. It's neither here or there. Ultimately, the business is there to make money. And that emphasizes how Scrooge just values business. He doesn't value, I think I wrote it, did I write it somewhere? Did I mention it somewhere? And more focus. Yeah, Scrooge values business over any kind of other relationship. Okay? Now, when you're writing your paragraph, now you got 200 words, so you probably are going to write maybe one or two petal paragraphs. Okay? You're probably going to follow a bit of a petal structure. Now, when you're writing a petal paragraph, you need to remember that your first bit of your answer is answering the question. So you might say, how is Scrooge presented? So Dickens presents. So you want to start your answer with Dickens presents Scrooge as, okay? Then you put your analysis, your words, but then please put the word because as well. Explain what's happening in the text that tells you that he is that way. Then you put your piece of evidence. So what quote are you going to add? Then you mention the technique. And then you analyze. So now that might be that you zoom in on a word, you might talk about the pun, you might talk about the semantic field and focus on specific words. You might focus on a phrase so was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, like that negative, that not so, suggesting that he's having an unusual different reaction to what we expect, and the fact that he's an excellent man of business. Now I think that's almost, I don't think that's Dickens himself saying this. This is almost how Scrooge feels about himself. And then you've got that sentence says Scrooge never painted out Marley's name. That might be something again that you might want to talk about the symbolism of the sign, and that is an aspect to analyze. And then finally, like, you can link it back to the question, or to context, thinking about the fact that Scrooge symbolizes maybe kind of capitalism or aspects of capitalism in general. Or you can even actually talk about here what Dickens is teaching us, or what Dickens is criticizing. Because ultimately, we're reading a bit of an allegory here, and we shouldn't really like Scrooge. Okay, I hope you find this a bit helpful. Try and make sure that you develop your answer, that you explain your answers well, and give a really, really good go at this response. Thank you.